scripted. I wanna equip you and use against my enemies, yeah. You see, I wanted to save you and then learn how to raise you, but I forget you from the wilderness.
And today, Eamon, if I may, I have a poem to read.
A poem. Okay.
Yeah, that's how it's pronounced. Actually, it's a poem, and it's about shadow people. So I would like to read this before we get into the episode.
Please, yeah.
Shadow people, apparitions, things that look weird to your vision. I'm lying in bed. It's dark and scary. Suddenly, I feel that something is near me. I turn my head to see Eamon pulling his Mickey. He's getting closer. He's trying to lick me. Oh no, you sex person, I'm not having that. I kick him like I'm Chow Yun Fat. The fiend runs off crying with a bloody penis, saying, I'm sorry, Rob, I didn't mean this. Monster Fuzz podcast, the best in its class. Look behind us, no shadows cast. Well.
Okay.
Drops mic.
That's a very good poem. And there's a poem that I recently it's gonna be tough. There's a poem that I recently read online, and it goes, verily the night grows near, upon my bed I sense a queer.
Oh, Jesus.
And in the moment I awake, I spy a Robert. My ass he stakes. I say, no, my Rob, please take your leave. He explains to me that he needs to breathe. My sexiness inside of him. So I let him away with it on a whim.
That's not bad.
That was tough. It's easier when you sing him.
That's why, you see, I knew that, and I was like, I'm going to ambush you. And I said a poem would throw you off, you see, because it's not your wheelhouse. So
no, what is it? Not a poem.
A poem.
Poem.
A poem.
Poem.
Yeah. So
poem,
that's a poem. So, what's up, everyone? Rob here, and with me is
Eamon. And
we are Monster Fuzz Podcast. And as usual, give us a shout on at Monster Fuzz Podcast on any social media. And just let us know what the crack is, how you've been, and all that. Eamon, you've been good, yeah?
I haven't been too bad. I do think that at this point we should, or at least I should verify that when me and Rob are calling each other gay, that's not meant as a slur against anybody else. It's like, I don't know, it's like school ground silliness. Sometimes I sort of think that it'd be much better to be gay and much easier. So there you go. So nothing said with hate in our hearts, people. Nothing said with hate.
Well, personally, I don't use any words like that. That's not in my vocab. So that's you that comes out with all these slurs all the time, so we'll just I gotta forward them on to the gay center.
The gay center. Right.
And they're gonna have a word with you about that, so you better watch yourself. But yeah, no, as Eamon says, to back him up there, yeah, it's all silly talk. Eamon is trying to rhyme things off silly the cuff goose. There, so yeah, we're having a silly goose time.
It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. I was sitting there with my tea writing that rhyme there for quite a while, enjoying myself. So today, yeah, we hope you're all well, people, and we hope you're enjoying summer the best you can. But today we are talking about shadow people, Eamon, and what exactly is a shadow person?
A shadow person. So basically, what a shadow person is they're also known as shadow entities, black mass, shadow figures, and anything like that. It's effectively a human figure that's seemingly made out completely of shadows. Shadow people, interestingly, they're probably the most cited paranormal encounters that people have alongside orbs. If you've ever seen those.
Yeah, those
pictures.
Are they like them? They're not rods, are they? Is that the same thing? You know what I remember them little rod things?
No. Yeah, rods was a different one. That was the one where Eddie Bravo and Joe Rogan went down the rabbit hole on, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No, so orbs aren't rods, but they could very much be like little insects or something like that are out of focus.
So
You know
what
what I
are
mean? Like
orbs?
they're sort of
It's like a light corona kind of thing, is it?
yeah, exactly. It's kind of like these little points of light that sort of weren't there when a picture was taken.
Ah,
But
yes,
there is
yes.
also, interestingly, people report like seeing actual orbs of light in forests and stuff like that.
Right.
Will-o'-the-wisps would be another thing. So I mean, that's been reported way before there were cameras. So
Okay.
that's I don't know, that's something to keep in mind. But the strongest link, I suppose, between or the link between sleep and shadow
Hmm.
people is really strong. So a lot of people argue that it's actually just a byproduct of sleep paralysis, which is basically there's a mechanism in your brain. And we'll get into this a bit more later, but basically, when you sleep, a part of your brain shuts off so that you don't act out your dreams.
Right.
And some people have an experience where they wake up, but that part of the brain hasn't come back into activity yet,
Right.
which basically means you're paralyzed but awake and in a kind of a sleep-like state, you know.
Hmm.
And basically, in moments like these, that's more often when you see a shadow person. In the room, so they believe that it's the presence of a spirit or an interdimensional entity.
Right.
And
Yeah. So,
interestingly enough,
well, sorry there to cut you off there. So it's so yeah, there's something that like they're a physical thing, but also sort of not physical. And then there's also like what you were saying there as well. There's more to tie in with. Well, what I seen when I was reading these notes actually was that that there was actually some psychological things to do with Carl Jung, and
yeah,
shouts out to Jellybean on that one because I didn't really realize it, but Carl Jung has a shadow sort of hypothesis, doesn't he, where every single person has a shadow. And do you want to tell people about that one?
yeah. So for Carl Jung, he says the shadow may appear in dreams and visions in various forms, and typically appears as a person of the same sex as that of the dreamer. The shadow's appearance and role depend greatly on the living experience of the individual, because much of the shadow develops in the individual's mind rather than simply being inherited in the collective unconscious. Nevertheless, some Jungians maintain that the shadow contains, besides the personal shadow, the shadow of society, fed by the neglected and repressed collective values.
So what does so basically we've covered all bases with shadow people now. We have like a psychological explanation. We've talked about them being a physical entity and an interdimensional
Yeah,
entity also.
Jung's. I actually just finished recently enough reading a book on Carl Jung and all this stuff. Carl Jung was a mad joke. Like he's
Hmm.
one of the most respected figures in psychology and certainly the history of psychology. He would have been around the same time as Freud and was originally his
Understudy,
sort of
right?
apprentice, if you like, and then he went
Yeah.
his own way. Yeah, yeah. Now, so his thing about the shadow is basically it's unintegrated parts of yourself. So effectively, let's say I'm trying to think of a good example of this. So let's say things that that you ever hear that thing that when something about someone else annoys you, it's actually a part of yourself
Right.
that
Yeah.
you're seeing in them that
Yeah.
maybe you don't give enough attention to. So yeah, so the shadow side is that kind of a thing, and the collective unconscious, then, according to Jung, is that's the he says there's a collective basically mind or subconscious that's underneath everything, and we all share that, almost like the life pool, Final Fantasy 7, to bring to bring that back into it. But it's basically basically a subconscious pool that we are all attached to. So this, when we've talked about kids being afraid of snakes and spiders
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that comes from that collective unconscious. But he would
Right.
sort of put that, yeah, and it would be more like we talk about it's your kind of memory and your DNA, whereas Jung himself would say that there's archetypes in society that come out of this collective unconscious. It's why the likes of superheroes, for example, share very similar traits, even though they're all in different places, because in the collective unconscious, that's what we see as a hero, if you like.
Yeah, like
You know what I mean? So
a universal good standard or like a universal bad standard within that society is what the shadow
exactly,
kind
yeah.
of is or whatever. Yeah.
There, Yeah, these kind of universal truths, and even Jordan Peterson as well would have a lot of this kind of stuff. He relates to Jung an awful lot. Now, what's interesting about Jung? So all this stuff is interesting about Jung, but what's also really interesting, again, keeping in mind he's one of the most respected people in all of psychology.
Yeah.
He has like a book about UFO encounters and stuff.
Oh,
He
well, I
has
have to cover that.
Oh yeah, Jung's got like there's mad stuff he has, but he's very much believes in the spiritual. Um, and numerology is another thing he's mad into,
So,
and he was very much involved in that kind of '60s drug-addled
Haze.
madness. He was well. He's yeah, certainly. I think a lot of people saw in Jung what they were trying to find or trying to uncover. So he's even though he's one of the most respected sort of characters in the history of psychology, he dips into some very strange paranormal type stuff, which is pretty interesting, you know?
Yeah, that sounds like our kind of guide, to be honest. Actually, another little piece of trivia is the Tool song 46 and 2 is about the shadow.
Mm.
So if you're a Tool fan
Yeah, yeah.
and you're a Carl Jung fan, and yeah, that's where you get that from. So I've got a question for you actually about the shadow.
Please.
What would your shadow do? Based on what we've
What would
talked about,
my
like,
shadow
yeah,
do?
what would your shadow be
Mm.
like?
What are things that annoy me? Um, I think that uh, I think there's definitely stuff about like not being maybe honest with yourself and
Mm.
with maybe people that you run into. So one thing that I've noticed that really annoys me is when people are really like when people are sort of pretentious. That annoys the shit out of me.
Right.
But I think that part of the reason for that is because the kind of personality I am is that when you put me in a room with anybody, I'll sort of try and to be friendly, and I'll sort of accommodate them, if that makes sense. I'll kind of um what do they say? Not a social butterfly exactly, but I might change a little bit depending on who I'm around. You know, that kind of way,
Yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
in itself is a bit of a falsehood. And I think so that's me recognizing like I don't like these pretentious people, but it's probably because I recognize the part of myself that's like, while it's not sort of consciously, well, it must be conscious because I'm talking about it, but while it's not while I'm not trying to just be a false person, I'm
Mm.
adapting to situations with people, and it's probably more prevalent in my job than it is in my personal life. You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
like to disappoint people, so I try to kind of maybe do things I don't want to do a lot of the time just to keep the peace. So that I think that would be a pretty good example of your shadow, and how it's other people think like your shadow means you just want to go around like killing everybody and
Mm.
and like acting out all these aggressive fantasies. But it's actually more often than not, it's how you treat yourself, and when you like put yourself down to accommodate something different
Mm.
is when it
Mm.
would bubble up a lot, you know?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, my shadow would probably just eat Jaffa cakes and wank all day. But
That sounds like you're quite in touch with your shadow then. That sounds like you've integrated it into your real life, because that's sort of seemingly that's something you're quite good at currently.
that's yeah, like I'm like half a shadow person at the minute. I'm like half a smoke person. I can sort of go through doors and stuff at the minute. I'm like half vapor, half person. But
And
yes,
it's just the extra calories of the Jaffa cakes that stop you from going through the door.
yeah, yeah, it's like a self-regulation mechanism. The Jaffa cakes stop me from
I
getting.
will I will say this though, because you and me have done those, the personality tests, and we're
Hmm.
we're both probably quite introverted
Yeah,
in terms of like need time to ourselves. Like even though we probably have great fun in social situations, like it's not like we're just sitting by ourselves by the Kool-Aid, sort of afraid
yeah,
to talk to people.
mm,
But we need to what would you say, defrag from
yeah.
from those situations and be by ourselves for a couple of days and all that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think a lot of people who are introverted, they maybe are a bit more in touch with some of those shadow things, because you spend more time by yourself. You're sort of forced to look at them sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, you chat to him a bit, like, mine just asks me most of the time for Jaffa cakes, and sometimes I indulge, sometimes I don't, and then it's like, oh, I have a wank and a Jaffa cake, and I'm like, ooh, well, I can't be doing that all day, and then it's trying to, like, convince me, and I'm like, oh, for fuck's sake, go on, sure. And that's just kind of the relationship that I have with my shadow. So I implore our listeners to investigate your shadows and find out what your shadow does. I love how you were like all introspective there for like 15 minutes. And
Yeah,
then I
you're
came
just
back
like
to
wanking and eating Jaffa cakes. Good lord.
but so back to shadow people. These are actually something that both of us have experiences in, which is kind of weird to even say.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's even more interesting to put it down on permanent record that we both have. I suppose shadow people sightings. I can't even remember yours, and I'm not even sure if you've told me, and you probably have, and I've just since forgotten. But
Yeah. No, I've definitely told you in the past.
yeah,
But
so
yeah, we definitely have.
bring us back to it. Tell us again.
Mm. So I had two actually. One of them I only remembered the other day. I was watching some video on YouTube about some Turtles game on the Game Boy.
As you do.
And I remembered that, yeah, how you know yourself. And I remembered that my friend in primary school, she had given me a lend. I think it was like Turtles 2 or Turtles 3 on the Game Boy. And I remember this back when the Game Boys were like, it was like a fucking mortar, like a big cinder block or whatever. And, massively heavy.
Yeah, it was like a Nokia 3210.
Yeah, exactly. But I was playing this Turtles game. It was really hard. I was kind of getting to a point where I had to admit to myself I wasn't really enjoying it, when I was like 7 or 8. So, and what happened was I turned it off and I sort of lay on my back on the bed, just looking up at the light. And when you blink at the light, it sort of causes like this kind of a black dot after image kind of a thing.
Right.
So I was I was pretty young. I was 7 or 8. So I was sort of playing with the light in that way and causing these little black dots in my vision. And I looked to my right and there was basically just a full figure standing beside my bed made of these black dots. And obviously I freaked out and jumped through it, ran to my parents' room, or rather my parents were in the sitting room, and like sort of just opened the door and they're like, "Oh, what's up?" And for some reason I didn't say it to them, which is weird looking back on it. Like I didn't say there was a monster in my room or whatever. Yeah, and I'd only remembered that very recently.
Yeah, I remember you telling me about this one. So yeah, you must have told me when you just remembered. Yeah, and what was the other one?
So the other one is the one that I've never forgotten. This happened when I was 18, and I've told this to loads of people. But basically, when I used to be in my parents' house, I had like a closet just opposite my bed. I had bunk beds from when I was a kid, and when I was 18, I think I still had them. So I used to sleep in the bottom one, and I had one of those old LCD sound systems. So it had that little green thing to tell you which disc tray was there. So there are usually 3 disc trays, and they had this little green sort of LCD, and it would make little shapes and patterns, and it basically just caused like this sort of a green hue to come out. So my closet doors were always open, and this thing was inside the closet, and then like my shirts or whatever were hanging on the shirt or the shirt rail. So I used to hang my towels on the side. Yeah, I was like, oh, it does not compute. But I used to keep the closet doors open and hang my towels on the end of them, right? So I had like a towel at the end. I remember it was on the left door, and I'm right opposite it, and this green light is kind of shining from me, or from the closet to where I'm lying. And I wasn't asleep. I know that because I basically saw one of the towels kind of like twitch or move a little bit. And I was trying to look at the curtain, because the way you close your curtains, there's usually a little V at the top where maybe some light gets through. So I was assuming that the light was kind of hitting off this towel in some way. And I was kind of looking at it, just trying to see what way it had hit it, or to explain why I thought I saw the towel twitch a little bit. And again, at this point, not afraid, nothing going on. And basically, as I was looking at it, about a 6-foot figure just made out of shadow just walked from the left. So from that room where it's totally dark where the towel is, walked there, makes it probably to halfway kind of across where the closet is, so where the light's kind of at its brightest, and just disappears from the feet up as it walks out. So it's only taken maybe, I don't know, two or three footsteps. Um,
So
and that's obviously quite
yes,
jarring. So
what do you? But just to sort of go into it a bit, like what when you say like made out of shadow, was this like a 3D body, or was it like was it like, do you know what I mean? Was it like let's just
yeah,
for
yeah.
talk's sake, like a chicken wire body, except it was formed by smoke, that kind of look, or like what would be the best way to
Yeah,
describe it?
it was more a smoky kind of shadowy. I suppose, yeah, like I would say shadow would be the best way to describe it, in that it didn't sort of like, the way smoke would sort of billow and move. The shadow didn't really seem to move. It was as if it was just a an after image of a person.
2 dimensional or 3 dimensional?
Well, I suppose because I was lying in my bed and looking at it, it sort of it looked like it walked. So like the leg,
Okay,
one leg moved
right.
past the other kind of a thing.
Okay,
But
I get you.
at the same time, like I didn't sort I wasn't able to rotate or move as it was moving, if that makes sense.
Right.
So what I saw, I suppose, like yourself, anything we look at is we get a 2D representation of it.
Yeah.
So I guess it was 3D, but I only saw what looked 2D, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's. Yeah. And were you like sort of? Did you have sleep paralysis at the time or anything like that?
No, I hadn't even gone to sleep. Like that's why it's so weird. Because I remember I was lying in bed. So I mean, you could make the argument that I fell asleep and then this happened and then I woke back up, but it was kind of seamless or something. So
Mm-hmm.
look, maybe it was something like that, and maybe the same is true with that other one I said about the Game Boy. I slept, I dreamt, but there was some sort of seamless transition between them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Where I
sort
don't,
of. Yeah, trying to establish like a correlation between, say, like
mm,
active sleep paralysis and seeing a shadow person, but it doesn't sound like that's the case with you there, no?
no, I think these, like, to be fair, the thing that I noticed was that this thing that I saw, certainly this one when I was 18, I've seen things on the internet that look the same, and I didn't see them until afterwards. Do you know what I mean? So I think the first time I saw one was that JK Cinema video that
Mm-hmm.
I introduced you to.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was the first time I saw, and I was like, oh shit, that's what I saw. So yeah, I'm not saying it's a ghost or an interdimensional like time traveler or whatever. I just know I saw something weird. Could it be a hallucination? Could I have slept and not known about it? All those things are possible, but it was definitely a strange experience.
Yeah, so I also have a shadow person experience, and until
Ooh,
recently, I was trying to remember it properly so that I could properly explain it. There's certain details I just can't go into to protect the other person's anonymity. I guess what you could say probably be the fairest
okay.
way to say it. But well, those details are irrelevant. Those are like the bonus content, but we don't need the bonus content. So essentially, I used to live in an apartment in a place called Cromwell's Fort in Wexford Town, which is actually, there have been like tales of hauntings in Cromwell's Fort, by the way. So it's a spooky
Well, with a
place,
name like that.
and yeah, if you're not
Mm.
familiar with Oliver
Well, for
Cromwell,
anyone I
terrible
suppose who
cunt.
doesn't know, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, not a big fan of his in Ireland, I'm afraid.
No, Oliver Cromwell basically was an English guy who was responsible, oversaw quite a lot of the like English genocide of Irish people. So that's like, he's not a beloved figure over here. As far as I understand, in England, he is viewed a little bit differently, but I attribute that to poor education and not like, they just don't know the facts. But
Yeah.
yeah, Oliver Cromwell, especially in our town of Wexford, he was a terrible cunt, and he actually has a fort here. And as far as I know, he didn't actually ever live in the fort. It was just sort of there for him. I don't think he ever stayed in it.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but so I lived in an apartment close to it, and the name of the apartments were Cromwell's Fort. But um, so I was again like you in bed, but so I was going to bed in my apartment, and I turned the sitting room lights off, and I that's an important detail. And I came into the hall. So the way the apartment was laid out was, there was a bedroom, there was like a universal little hall thing, And from the bed in the bedroom, you could see the bathroom. You could see sort of into the bathroom. You could see like part of it. And you could see the kitchen door. And yeah, that was all you could see from the bed. So my girlfriend at the time, she was in the bed, and I went to the toilet, whatever. I came into the bedroom, I got into bed, she got up, went to the toilet. So she's in the toilet, whatever. I think close my eyes. Then I open my eyes and I see that the light for the sitting room is on again. So I know that she's gone into the into the kitchen, because the kitchen was in there. So she had gone in to get some water, as far as I remember. But she had left the bathroom light on. So in the bathroom, I could see, yeah, a shadow person, but it looked perfectly like an outline of horror. So it was, but unlike you, it looked kind of two dimensional. It was like a shadow that had been cast on the wall, except it was like freestanding. So, and it was also moving, but it was like moving in like 2D. So it's kind of hard to describe that. But, and I opened my eyes and I seen it, and I was like, oh, that's weird. And I closed my eyes again, and then I opened them. I was like, wait, what the fuck was that? And then she came back into the bedroom, and I was like, all right, okay, this is nuts. And I don't know if I even mentioned it to her at the time. I think I said it later. But for me, and like just a disclaimer, because like people might be saying, and I'm not sure about you, and so I don't want to speak for you, but
Yeah.
I never fall asleep without, like, I'm like a robot. I have to literally get into bed. I have to say, right, now is time for me to fall asleep. Then I fall asleep. I never doze ever. Like I could be going on 4 or 5 hours sleep and I don't doze. Like I never just drop off. I never do that ever. Like no matter the situation, I've never dropped off. So for me, at least in my head, it definitely wasn't a thing when I was partially asleep or anything like that. It definitely seemed like if I was to like say that it was something real life and say, right, okay, let's ignore the paranormal side, I would definitely say at the very least it was my eyes playing some type of shadow trick with me rather than it was anything like me falling asleep and seeing something. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, I've certainly had encounters where I've woken up at night and there's been someone standing at the foot of my bed or whatever. But they're much easier to explain in that, like, you're like, well, I was obviously half asleep. And it wasn't
Right.
quite sleep paralysis, but I'd wake up and thered be someone standing there. And that's happened a lot of times to me over the years, but just not maybe in the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 10 years. But these ones that I saw, like I again, like you, it's very difficult for me to just fall asleep and have a
Yeah.
nap.
Yeah.
But I I have done a couple of times over the span of my life, and when I
Mm.
wake up, I quite disoriented and I don't really know what's happening.
Yeah.
So I could wake up, say if I came home from work and I had a nap, I might wake up and think it's the next day and I have to go to work, and so it takes me like a few seconds to be like, oh right, no, everything's okay.
Right.
These experiences weren't like that at all. Certainly the one where I was 18, like I remember lying there afterwards and just sort of being like, what? And then I turned on all the lights in my room because I obviously got nervous. But yeah, it certainly didn't feel like any time that I've woken from sleep or anything like that. And
There's
I didn't have any kind of,
yeah.
yeah, a memory of sleeping and go. It was very strange, very, very strange.
Yeah, no, that does sound fairly mad. And mine the same. Like, and people that know me know that I don't really sort of like, I'm not like one of these people that's going around seeing fucking ghosts and everything. It's for me, I can't rationally explain it, and most of the things I would be able to rationally explain. But if I was to guess, I would just say, oh, my eyes were sort of burned out. I don't know, something weird with my eyes, but it was. I still remember how it looked, like vividly,
Yeah.
and I still remember, and the shadow itself was looking in the mirror. So it was like leaning over the sink and looking into the mirror, as if, like, sometimes when you see, like, say a girl is like leaning over the sink, like doing her makeup or something, and she's kind of like hunched over the mirror, kind of like
Yeah, yeah.
that kind of posture, that position. But like I had,
Well, I
like,
wonder.
what were you saying?
I was just gonna say, I wonder, is what we saw actually just after echoes? Like, you're seeing an echo
Yeah.
of maybe your then girlfriend or whatever, looking in the mirror, I'm seeing an echo of myself walking from one side of the room to the other. You know, like, I mean, it's just
That's
supposition because we've no
yeah.
idea. But
Yeah, no, no, you're right. Yeah, but there's a lot of I don't know. There's a lot of spooky energy about certain things. Like I used to have
mm,
mad recurring nightmares as well. Like, and that's something that we talk about the old hag and stuff in this. But yeah, we'll definitely get into that a little bit later on in the episode. But I definitely had a fairly unusual sleep history when I was a kid. Anyway, at the very least, it was fucking terrifying. But when did shadow people become popular? Like, when did people start actually talking about shadow people?
yes, so basically, like you said yourself, the old hag and all that sort of stuff. So people put um, sleep paralysis down to some sort of demonic activity, like, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But I
Mm,
suppose uh, in terms of more contemporary stuff, um, when it starts to come through, many people point to the April 21st episode of the popular radio show Coast to Coast AM,
right.
hosted by the late Art Bell, and he interviewed a Native American elder whose name is pretty awesome, Thunder Strikes.
Oh,
La,
nice.
da, 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 thunder. Um, he's also known as Harley Swift Deer Regan.
Another nice name.
And during the show, yeah, pretty cool.
Mm.
So during the show, listeners were basically encouraged to submit drawings of shadow people that they had seen. Um, and a large number of these drawings were then immediately shared publicly on the website, which kind of proved that this phenomenon had an awfully large amount of the public that had basically said that they'd encountered them.
Right.
Which was pretty interesting, yeah. And the same year is I think it's 2001, I believe this is when it's going on. I haven't written it down in my notes there. Obviously, Coast to Coast. If you go onto Spotify, Coast to Coast, I think they have some historic shows there,
Right.
and I think there's a new host doing it. But Art Bell's very he'd be very well known in those kind of cryptid circles, ufology, all that sort of stuff. And in fact, actually, you know, that's speaking of Tool, because we're talking about 46 and 2,
Yeah.
same album on Anima. You know, the end of it when the guy rings in talking about the UFOs
Yeah.
that are trying to
Yeah.
get him, that's actually from Coast to Coast. So that was a real phone call.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, so there you go. There's another one. So basically, same year in October, a lady called Heidi Hollis publishes her first book on the topic of shadow peepers, and later becomes a guest on Coast to Coast. So this is when they're kind of going into prominence and they're becoming more and more popular.
Yeah.
Hollis describes shadow people as dark silhouettes with human shapes and profiles that flicker in and out of peripheral vision. She claims that people have reported the figures attempting to jump on their chest and choke them. So that probably links in with some of that sleep paralysis stuff that we'll cover later. She also believes the figures to be negative, like alien beings that can be repelled by various means. She says invoking the name of Jesus can help here. Jesus, help me out, James. So, right, here's the thing. Right. Yeah. So I took a quick look at Hollis's website, and I'm not saying that what she said isn't true or anything like that, but this, I'm basically going to say she has a book that's called Hatman Book 2, a guide in comics on how to get rid of dark beings for all ages. And I'll just let you maybe talk to the listeners about what you see when you have the picture there.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, the pictures aren't really very well done or whatever, but that's a book cover. And so let's see. I'll just read a little excerpt here of it. If you are dealing with a haunting, shadow people, or Hatman, and they're all registered trademarks, which is kind of worrying. Maybe we should. Which is worrying.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well.
And you want to get rid of them, then this book is for you. A fun but informative comic written and drawn by Heidi Hollis to help you and your family out of your scary situation. So, have you seen him or them? You thought you saw something in the corner of your eye. You turn to look and it's either gone or closer. It's black. It takes form. It's a man with a hat. It's a dark cloud or something resembling a spider. Then it only gets worse if it leans in to show you its glaring red eyes, instilling fear in you that is literally paralyzing. What do you do? In your dreams, it's in your face, it's on your mind, and it's wearing you down. For adults and children alike, these things are causing unforgettable fear and horror worldwide. Some people experience it once and dread the day they ever see it again, while others see it every day. Pardon me. One thing to know is that you are not helpless, you are not alone, and you can keep them away. This guide in comics is for all ages, a colourful and even fun look into shedding some light on a dark topic. With this book, you can help yourself, your children, and others stand strong in the light against utter darkness. So from the author, she says, this visual guide will give you the tools that you'll need to create a barrier in your home for you and your entire family. It's comical, the methods are easily explained, and will honestly leave you and your family wanting to read more. This could be perceived as scary, so use parental discretion with your children. For readers aged 7 and up, 80 pages and 14.15 for a paperback. I would like to. I can't wait to have kids so I can terrorize them with all this mental psychotic shit.
I was just about to say that's going to cause serious psychological problems.
Like, the shadow people are coming. It's time to lock up all the doors. Who don't look over there is the shadow. But I'm telling you, I'll tell you, here's a weird one from my childhood.
This is your Nightshade one, isn't it?
This is that one too. But I've had so many weird ones from my childhood. This is a different one.
Right.
I don't know. My dad had this friend. I don't know. She was, for some reason, there was an aura of weirdness about her, and I don't know whether that was imprinted on me by my dad. Like, he was like, "Yeah, this one's a bit mental," or I don't know if she went missing or something. There's something about.
Can I just say before we continue that a lot of your dad's mates are pretty weird?
Yeah.
Just to put that out
Yeah,
there.
well, we could actually do just a podcast about me and my dad's mates, probably, and like we would be able to talk ad nauseum for hours on end, and they will probably be recurring guests at different times. But yeah, this person, I don't know where or what happened to her, but there was definitely something strange about her. But she drew me a picture of what she described as like a dream, like a creature that would like protect me in my dreams, right? And
Yeah.
I had this in my bedroom, and it was fucking terrifying. I think at the time I was probably about 4 years old. I had a lot of nightmares around that stage, and this was probably in response to that. But the artwork was like a pencil drawing of some kind of creature that looked a bit like Jack Skellington from Nightmare on Elm Street, but more creepy looking. So I had this on my wall, and then a recurring nightmare that happened around that time was, do you know Ralph out of the Muppets, the dog that plays piano? Have you ever seen him?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to have a doll of his, and it would come alive at night when I was asleep and try and murder me. And I used to have these nightmares where, like, me and my brother used to share bunk beds in our room, and in these nightmares, Rolf would be trying to kill both of us, and he'd have like superhuman strength, and he'd be like pushing open the bedroom door, and his like knife would be coming through the bedroom door, the crack in the door and shit. And he just had these like dead cold Muppet eyes, and he was just always trying to kill me. And like, I'd wake up and I'd try and hide him or try and get rid of him or whatever. But yeah, he was a recurring nightmare for years I had of Rolf killing me. And like, the reason that I'm talking about this stuff is because this was like, as far as I'm aware, I think this just came out of nowhere, like this like weird recurring nightmares. And I didn't have someone going around saying, shadow monsters are here, kids. Let's read this paperback, and let's be careful at every corner. There's something dangerous in the shadows. Like, I think it's a really unhealthy thing to imprint on children at a young age, to be honest.
I tend to agree with you there. That's that's definitely a bit creepy.
Do you have did you ever have like recurring nightmares or anything as a kid?
Oh, the only one I can remember is the one we talked about of Michael Myers, but that probably
Yeah.
didn't happen until I was a bit older.
Last
We
year.
covered that in yeah, that was like earlier this week. The nightmares I had, I don't really think I had any recurring ones, but here's one that's kind of funny. I did have a nightmare because I think I was, and I remember the nightmare itself, but actually what happened in it is kind of interesting. Um, so I was watching like He-Man or something, I think,
Yeah.
and he was fighting like Skeletor or some,
Yeah.
something like that, or I'd watched some sort of Dungeons and Dragons type thing. Remember the old cartoon, the Dungeons and Dragons
Yeah.
cartoon?
Yeah.
It's really old, 80s, 90s, but they would fight skeletons or whatever. And I remember having a dream that I was like crossing over this really long sort of a bridge that was made out of earth and had all these stalactites kind of underneath it. So it was very like, edgy kind of on the bottom and then flat on the top. And it led into this big kind of a tower. And I went into the tower and there was all skeletons on the ground, and I was like looking around, and then one of them just jumped up and started chasing me. I'm like maybe 9. So I, in the dream, freak out and start running away. And I don't remember any of this, and I don't even remember the part. What happened was, while I was still asleep, I must have ran into my dad's room and just screaming, "Daddy, he's chasing me! He's chasing me!" I like ran in, and then he was like, "What are you?" And my dad, like typical, if there actually was someone chasing me, he would have been like, "We ever shut up and go back asleep, Amy?" So so that was like the only nightmare that I had loads of nightmares as a kid, but that one is the one that kind of, I remember laughing at it the next day when my dad told me, "Yeah, I had to put you back to bed because you like came running around the house shouting that there were skeletons chasing you."
My sleep shit, like we're sort of going off topic a little bit, but fuck it, like my sleep shit was absolutely bananas. It was like I used to have recurring nightmares as well around the same age. It was all around 3 or 4, where I'd be on this landing of the stairs, and it was in my old house that I was a child and grew up in. And on this landing, obviously there were stairs going up and down, right? But in the nightmare, there was a spotlight on me, and I was on the landing, and everything around me was pitch black. And I would hear my dad screaming, like really angry, like I'm like, "Oh fuck!" I'd be like, "What the fuck is going on here?" And like I'd be terrified in these nightmares. And then in the nightmares he'd come up and beat the fucking shit out of me, and like it was like he was like a madman or something. And yeah, they used to be horrible, but I had them that frequently that I was able to wake myself up from dreams really easy. Like I actually developed the ability to sort of in a dream say, "Right, this is a dream, it's time to wake up," and I'd wake up. This was really crazy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had one. I think I had a lot of dreams about Freddy Krueger as a kid, but I don't fully remember them.
I had a lot of Alien as
That
well,
kind of
man.
way.
Yeah.
Which was the Alien?
Alien, just the alien from the xenomorph from Aliens. I used to dream about
Oh,
that
the
motherfucker all the
xenomorph.
time.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough being a kid. It's tough when you see that stuff as a kid. 'Cause, like, your poor little brain can't handle it properly, and you think you're like a hard man watching it. You're like, "Yeah, I'm watching movies for 18-year-olds," and then you go to bed and you're like, "That's why you're not meant to watch until you're 8." Okay,
like, yeah, my whole life
Um,
was terrorized by zombies. Like I was exposed to zombie shit way too young, and xenomorph shit way too young. Like it absolutely terrorized me.
Yeah, the zombies got me as well.
Yeah,
I remember we watched
which
it was after, Resident Evil, the first one. So even though they look terrible polygon, like it's not scary at all to look back, but that used to freak me out a lot when I was a kid. Pennywise the Clown, the original Tim Curry, scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. Had lots of nightmares about him. But me and my cousins got like a really cheesy zombie movie that I can't even remember the name of. I must try and track it down and watch it again so I can laugh at it. But it was like just this really ridiculous zombie movie where lads going around with a bow and arrow shooting zombies in the head and all. Like it's like like a C movie. I can't even remember the name, but yeah, I had lots of zombies were definitely one that kind of freaked me out a lot as a kid as well.
Yeah, they were a universal spook. So
and
yeah,
I will say if if you have kids or you're listening to this and you're young, the next bit might actually freak you out a bit because we're going to be talking about the Hat Man, who is like effectively the boss of the Shadow People. So the Hat Man is basically, a lot of people claim that they wake in the dark to find a shadowy figure looming over them. Now, it's certain that these dark apparitions aren't human. And there's all kinds of theories about their existence, time travelers, aliens. No one knows who they are, where they come from, if it's part of, the brain that's kind of operating as you're half asleep. No one really knows anything. But, and this interestingly ties in with what we were talking about with, I was about to say Karl Marx, with Carl Jung and the collective unconscious. A lot of people report seeing this dark figure with a hat, which is really strange. So an awful lot of people report seeing this dark figure with a hat.
Kind of like the old El Paso man, isn't it?
The old El Paso man, yeah, kind of.
It's like that hat, the old El Paso hat.
Yeah, pretty much. So many witnesses claim that he's over 6 feet tall and basically always wears this hat. According to many creepy stories about this Phantom Hat Man, he tends to appear during times of emotional turmoil or distress. And they say that he'll basically just observe you as you sleep.
Yeah, he kind of looks like Undertaker, doesn't he? Actually,
yeah, he does look like Undertaker. Yeah. No. It's just a totally silhouetted version. Interestingly, there was an ex-girlfriend of mine from years and years and years and years ago when I was a teenager. And her brother, I remember telling me a story that they had a house in, it was like Enniscorthy or something like that. But they told stories of seeing, and this is not being asleep, this is being awake and seeing this shadow figure with a hat.
Oh, really?
That would growl at. Yeah, like a specter, like a shadow figure with a hat that would growl at them.
Oh, that's
and the brother would be like shouting at the kids to get away and all. Yeah, like that's spooky shit. Now look, they could have just been saying that to give me the willies, but it's
interesting coincidence nonetheless that a hat was one of the descriptive features. Like,
yeah, and this is long before I had ever heard of the Hat Man or anything like that.
This would have been early 2000s where everyone was stupid. Like, we didn't have the internet and we wouldn't have known about Hat Man, and like the average Irish person wouldn't have known about Hat Man either. So it wouldn't have been something that was even like on our radar. So that's an important thing actually in general with episodes about our accounts or things that like are the early 2000s or the 90s when we were growing up. Like there wasn't widespread internet in Ireland at all then. Do you know what I mean? Like internet didn't, like broadband didn't really start showing up until like widespread until like what year?
It's like 2006. You could almost say like
2006, 2007,
maybe even after that.
Yeah. I think because I remember being one of the first ones with broadband, and that would have been around that mark somewhere, maybe 2005 or something. But so like it's important to put that out there because I don't think a lot of people do. It's like when they're talking about the past, like people just are like, oh yeah, like it was now. But yeah, like Shadow Man, Hat Man wasn't really someone that would have been on the collective conscious at the time. So it's interesting when someone describes that back then. Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to go on and tell people a little bit more about the Shadow Man?
Yeah. Accordingly, everyone that's seen him anyway, the Hat Man appears as a completely dark figure like other shadow people. The obvious difference is that Hat Man wears a hat which has appeared as a top hat to some, and it's appeared with a fedora to others. So like he could be like a milady neckbeard Yu-Gi-Oh!
Could be the little fella from Fuzz.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. And also... fedoras are never a good idea, guys. If he's just a little bit of a bit of fashion advice, they're just never a good idea. Trust me. While many people are unable to make out what he is wearing, obviously because he's kind of shadowy, some report seeing old-fashioned clothing like a long trench coat or a cape, and he always appears at least 6 feet tall. The Hat Man's face is usually indistinguishable, but many who he has visited have claimed he has glowing red eyes, unlike other shadow people. So yeah, that's the main difference. I suppose the shadow person that I seen had like no descriptive eyes, as you could say. It was more like a silhouette, and I suppose the same was true for yours, Eamon.
Yeah, there was no facial feature. There was actually no features at all that I could point out aside from it looked like the shadow of a person.
Yeah, same. Yeah. There have been reports that Hatman carries a gold watch attached by a chain to his belt and will occasionally look at it. Some people have asserted that the Hatman has attacked them, often choking them, but in most reports, Hatman merely watches the victim. And I suppose a victim is maybe the wrong word. I don't know whether they're a victim. Um, Unless he's
I
actually.
survived. A Hatman survivor.
Yeah, yeah. In many cases, the Hatman seems to be hanging around areas where there are negative emotions taking place, such as households that have experienced domestic abuse, fighting, or depressed family members. Some people believe the Hatman is a demon sent to bring those who were about to die to hell. Others think he is demonic. Many have also noted a very dark energy emitted from him and said they immediately knew he was extremely evil and very likely wanted to kill them. So I suppose, yeah, they sensed that sinister type of thing, like we were talking about in the last episode about sensing when someone's watching you. I suppose they got the same sense, except it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
even more sinister. Some get the feeling the Hatman is enjoying their fear and actually feeding off it. It's possible, however, that since people who witness Hatman are usually already in fearful, angry, or other emotionally charged states, thanks to whatever negative things going on in their life, they associate Hatman with their negative feelings, right? So yeah, just because they're going through a bad spell, they associate it with that. But do you believe in like energies that get stored from like they're saying here about negative emotions in a house and like that? Do
Mm.
you believe that there's possibly something that can feed off those negative emotions or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of this is a tricky one because if we're talking about it now and it's daylight, I'm by myself in the house and I'm like, yeah, I think that that could be true. And then later, like 4 hours from now, I'll be like, no, that I was just bullshitting. That's none of it's true. There's there's a lot of there's a lot of people who believe that this, let's call them spirits or otherworldly interdimensional entities, something. And I'm not just talking about shadow people here, but some sort of otherness, let's call it. And there's some people that believe that these entities basically feed off negative emotions. So if there is, especially fear, it's almost like It the Clown.
Right.
It wants to make children afraid because it actually eats them as opposed to the feeling. But I suppose fear in a child in the movie that it says that it tenderizes them. They taste better when they're afraid. So if there is these kind of these entities that can maybe translate into our dimension somehow, and they do want to feed on our negative emotions, it would sort of make sense that you would see them when you were in a state of depression or anxiety or fear, or any other kind of loneliness, whatever it is.
Like,
So yeah, I think
yeah,
I think it's possible. I think it's possible.
and like if you were to, um, like, would you believe in, say, for example, like I was talking about earlier with like Cromwell's fort, that there might have been some like bad carryings on that happened in that area over time, that maybe somehow
Yeah,
that
yeah.
energy is there or something?
Yeah, I do believe that you can store. I do believe that pockets of energy can be stored in places, and that can be really good energy. It can be bad energy. I think really good energy we probably just don't recognize because if your life's going okay, not like that you feel amazing, but you're not gonna, if you walk into a place, you're like, oh, this is a nice area. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you can feed off
But I
good
do
energy
think,
too, though.
yeah,
Some
yeah.
people have really good energy, and you're like, you just immediately feel good by being around them.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Yeah, I think energies can be stored and left in places. And I also think that if you go to very wild places, I think if you go to a forest, if you go to, maybe rivers, stuff like that, I'm sort of a weird person who believes that there's some, not entities exactly, but there's energy from something that's a little bit outside of what we are there. And maybe it's just connecting us with our wild roots or something. Um, but I do think in the places that humans don't tend to go to, there's other things around there,
I wonder
you
is it
know?
yeah, I wonder in some cases is it like folkloric where like, so say for example, if you shoot a crow and or like kill a rat. A lot of people when they're killing a rat will leave the dead body in an area so that the rest of the rats can sense and smell it, and they know, right, this is an area that we don't go near, and they will continue
Yeah.
not to go there for years and years and years and years. And the same is true for
Mm.
birds. Like a lot of farmers do things like that where it's like completely fucking grim, but like they'll shoot like a load of crows, and they'll like basically hang a load of them from like a string, and they'll just go like, there you go, basically as a message to the crows that if you come back on my turf, you know, it's not going to be good for you. But
Hmm.
they end up knowing not to go there, and I suppose you could say that it is energy, but also you could say that it
Yeah.
is folkloric as well, in that like that it's passed down and it's told over a tale over many many years. Like I wonder
Mm.
if me and you walked into an abandoned house, two abandoned houses, one where, you know, 30 people were murdered. There's no real outward evidence that anyone was murdered there. And then we go into another house where no one is murdered, but it's equally run down. I wonder, would we have the same sensation in both buildings?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other one might be, let's say, there was some massacre here, but they've since turned it into some sort of a health spa, and it's
Mm,
got like nice fountains and all this smell of lavender and, massage
mm,
oil and all that. Maybe you don't, you know what I mean? So, like I said, when I say like, oh yeah, I think that, I do think there's truth to folklore as well, that there's, even when we were talking about the tales of Gilgamesh, where they have to fight, these kind of Neanderthal hairy men and stuff like that.
mm,
Like there's folklore, but that folklore actually relates us to probably some of the battles that we would have had with with Neanderthal when we were kind of Homo erectus and all that sort of stuff. And it's kind
mm,
of etched in our DNA. Maybe goes back into that kind of um the collective unconscious that Jung was talking about. So I think all of it's possible. But
mm,
again, like if you walk into a place and you haven't slept in 2 days and you have some stuff going on in your life, you're more likely to have a negative reaction to that place because you yourself have more negativity going on inside you then. So I think you have to be careful about how far you put it
yeah.
in one direction or another. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's also how it's interpreted. But do you want to go back to good old Heidi Hollis there? We have a little bit more about her.
Yeah, yeah. We're back to our mate Heidi Hollis, registered trade, Mark Hatman. Um, so Heidi Hollis, who we talked about earlier, she actually may be able to back that up with a story of a German soldier, or sorry, a story that a German soldier told her about witnessing Hatman.
Ah,
When he asked who the Hatman was, the being told him that his name was Scratch, which is an old nickname for the devil.
right.
Um, also recounted a story of a suicidal man who woke to find himself in a hospital and the Hat Man close by. According to the story, the Hat Man quickly disappeared after the man woke up, but not before saying, "I almost had you."
Mm.
So I assume maybe he's either woken up in a hospital or maybe he's tried to kill himself or something like that.
Um,
Um,
that's crazy, and that's also yeah.
mm,
Just the suicidal thing is another whole different kettle of fish. But there has been tales of people like that, you know, when they after they attempt suicide, like something happens in between the attempt and like it going through where they realize like, oh, I'm not doing that. I think it would be unfair to speculate that they didn't want to do it because it's Hatman, but there
yeah.
is something sometimes does happen. I think the easiest thing to explain that way is just like, oh yeah, sure. You know, they just had a change of heart because your body was like, "Fuck this." But the interesting thing about Hatman is it's a global phenomenon. That, you know, we're talking about just a few little cases here, but the really interesting thing about Hatman is, yeah, it's a global phenomenon appearing in many different cultures across many different countries. So,
Mm.
why does this particular type of shadow person tend to appear universally? So there's a lot to that, isn't there?
I think so, yeah. And I think actually, just before we get into the sort of the relevance of the hat, I'll tell you
Mm,
a quick story that I heard a couple of years ago that stuck with me.
mm.
So, I don't know, have you ever listened to that The Moth, where people tell stories about
No.
their lives or whatever? So it's basically like, say, 10 people get up and they tell a story with a certain theme. So the theme, in this case, the one I saw, the theme was fear.
Right.
Um, and basically everybody votes on who told the best story, and whoever wins goes through to a kind of quarterfinal, semi-final, and then someone has the best story of the year, if you like, and they have to be real. There's some caveats like that where like all the stories have to be real, and they can only be like, I think it's 10 minutes long or something like that.
Cool.
But there's one in Dublin that's similar called the Dublin Story Slam.
Right.
And I don't know if it's still going or what, but anyway, so this woman told a story on the theme of fear, which is really interesting. And she said, and I'm going to paraphrase it and just shoot through it really fast. But basically, she was in Germany and she was in a car with her friend. They were trying to take a shortcut to get to whatever destination they're going to, maybe a party or something. I can't really remember. But as they were on the way there, they went into this, back road, really, really dark. And I think the car, I can't remember offhand, but like the car shut out or something like that, or the lights went out for a second. And they're obviously pretty afraid. And when the lights come back on, either the car shut down, the lights came back on, or something walked into the headlights.
Right.
Okay. So I can't remember off the top of my head, but basically something walks into the headlights. And what the lady described was, she described the depiction of death. So the scythe, the black robes, that stuff that we're all very familiar with. So she turns to the guy in the car and they're both like, oh, Jesus. He reverses out and they drive away. And they never really talk about it again. And she said years later, she's telling this story. And she's probably told the story many times. And she said it to, I think her daughter said to her, did you ever actually ask him what he saw? She's like, maybe you just saw something weird and you thought it was death, but it was actually just a farmer with a load of tarp that he was carrying back, So she's like, okay. So she rings this dude she hasn't talked to in years, right? And here's where it gets really interesting. She rings this guy and they chat for a while, and she goes, look, I know this is like a long time ago, but remember that night we were at that back road and we both saw that thing? And your man's like, yeah. And she goes, well, like, what was that? And here's the interesting part, is what he described to her was a Germanic depiction of death, which was, I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't the scythe and the hood and that kind of thing that we have in our culture. It was something different, but it also represented the person that takes souls to the next life. So the really interesting bit for me was that they both saw the same thing, albeit under a different cultural optic, which I thought was just fascinating.
It is fascinating, actually, and also we will be able to expand on that in our next episode on werewolves. There's also a similar little link, like what you're describing there, between different cultures seeing different things. So without spoiling too much, that is definitely something that we're going to be going into even more. But very, very interesting. But what does the hat actually symbolize?
Yeah, so I did a quick search for what the symbolism of the hat reveals. And basically, the hat represents authority or power. Because it covers the head, the hat contains thought. Therefore, if it is changed, an opinion is changed. So the cover head shows nobility, and different hats signify different orders within the social hierarchy. So, for example, what they're saying is if the hat is changed, the opinion is changed. So whoever wears the hat is the one that changes the opinion. That you're talking like, say the Pope, look at his hat. Right. If he changes his hat, maybe, I don't know, Jesus was 41 days in the desert. I don't know. Right. But you know what I mean? Like it's that kind of a thing. So also the removal of a hat upon entry into a building shows respect. So is it saying that the hat man sort of doesn't respect you? He doesn't take his hat off in your presence. You're not on his level. And is the other part maybe that he is kind of a higher order of shadow people or otherworldly kind of things.
Tips hat, milady. Tips fedora. Oh
God.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely something worth considering. Why the hat? Because the hat is definitely a weird one. It's not as if like there's some type of, it's actually quite a departure from most sort of modern like ghost, devil, demon symbology. Like a hat kind of gives it this sort of more modern sort of twist, I suppose you could say, obviously, because like the devil is just horns, he's got his little fork tail, his hooves and things like that. And generally, a hat is like, obviously, a hat that they're describing is definitely semi-modern, right? Like a fedora or like
Mm.
a cowboy hat.
Yeah, I guess you're talking what, like 1900s kind of a thing? Maybe
18,
1800, like 1800s, 1900s. Yeah.
17 even, actually, probably, now that I think about it. But
Mm,
I maybe
right.
even further back. But I think the uh, the form of hat is interesting. And when I was reading through your notes, like I found some stuff myself as well. So it's very interesting that it shows up. But yeah, Alex Jones referred to it as interdimensional child molesters
Oh,
on
right.
episode 911 of the
Yeah.
Joe Rogan Experience. So maybe it's that.
Well, yeah. So basically, what he was saying is they got him high on episode 911 of the Joe Rogan.
That was
Obviously,
classic,
episode
yes.
911.
Yeah.
That whole thing. But he goes. So basically, he's like, Joe Rogan, you want to know what's really going on? And Joe's like, yes, please. They're all high as kites, and he goes, interdimensional child molesters coming from a different reality, and the elite know about it, and they're trying to get your babies, Joe. Like the typical Alex Jones. But basically, yeah, is it possible that these shadow people are what he referred to as interdimensional child molesters? They take the energy, especially like the clown children. If they can make them frightened, you can feed more
Right.
from them. Do you know what I mean? And again, Alex Jones literally did say, "quote interdimensional child molesters." Like,
That's
so
that's the first thing
take
that
what
I
you
would
want.
think of anyway, to be honest with you. But
Of course.
yeah, you're saying David Icke called them argons.
I'm pretty sure it was argons. I can't
Hmm.
remember off the top of my head, but basically it's like argons are a similar thing. They're interdimensional. They need to feed off our negative emotions, so they try to cause us to feel negative emotions.
Right.
But I get very lost here because there's a part with Nibiru, which is Planet X,
Yeah.
or the 10th planet, which is on an axis that comes around once every 10,000 years. There's a holographic moon. Apparently we are holograms or projections of the real us.
Yeah.
I can't follow it after one. I get too confused. And then there's also the links with the highest members of society being lizard people and drinking blood. So
Well,
I don't know, man.
well, we're acting as if this is crazy, but we'll probably, most likely, actually not probably, we definitely will be covering lizard people at some point, I'm sure. And maybe our buddy Megalania might somehow fit into the lizard people equation somehow or another.
Yeah, it's
And also lizards do, Komodo dragons and stuff sometimes do walk on 2 feet when they're fighting and things like that. So let's just imagine a Komodo dragon with a fedora, and that's what the shadow boss is. But
that
there's
sounds like a really good cartoon. Like that
yeah,
sounds like a really fun cartoon. Komodo dragon on two legs with a fedora.
yeah, for sure, man. But to put the gin back in the bottle, as you've titled it, or
Very clever play on words there.
yeah, so the gin the gin has been in some horror films, I think, right? I've definitely heard of the gin before I read your
Yeah,
notes.
I think the one that it's
Is it?
most famous for in the West, like over in the East, they have shitloads of gin movies and stuff.
Yeah,
But in the West, I think the one it's most famous for is Wes Craven's Wishmaster.
right. I
That was the
haven't
gin, so it's
seen
like
that.
the from Aladdin. Okay.
I'm wondering, is it in Insidious in some way, shape, or form? Like, is it mentioned or something? I'm not quite sure, but I definitely know. I've definitely heard that gin before is spelled Djinn. But
Yeah.
yeah, to familiarize you guys with the jinn, it has a broad meaning of spirit or demon in Islamic culture. From this context, the term jinn is used to both a collective designation for any supernatural creature and also to refer to a specific type of supernatural creature. Yeah, so I suppose even in Western culture, you have a demon or a devil. Like a devil would probably be the best way. You'd use the term devil for other
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
And
But yeah, demon for sure. Yeah.
yeah. Therefore, jinn are often mentioned together with devils, demons, shayatin, I think is the way to say that.
Stop shiatting on there.
Both devils and jinn feature in folklore and are held responsible for misfortune, possession, and diseases. However, the jinn are sometimes supportive and benevolent. They'd be like, ha, go on, eat Jaffa cakes and have a wank. Ha ha ha. They're like, they're
Spring
like,
heel Jack.
they like laugh you on and encourage you. They feed you
Mm.
Jaffa cakes while you're having a wank. But they're mentioned frequently in magical works throughout the Islamic world. To be summoned and bound to a sorcerer. Catherine
Mm.
Ramsland, professor of forensic psychology, in an interview with Psychology Today said, according to lore, the jinn were here first and were pushed out by or for us. So think of the ancients in Final Fantasy VII. And, so, and some of them are still angry about it and want the place back. Their motives include curiosity, infatuation, obsession, playfulness, trickiness, hostility, and Jaffa cakes, as well as malevolence. Some people feel jinn are benevolent and helpful, but if they are, it is always for a price. People have a tendency to think that other entities are like cut-out cookies all the same. The jinn, as well as other beings, are varied like humans, neither all good nor all bad, and they have unique personalities. So quite a diverse group of people, Evan, yeah?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's basically what you're talking about there is what they in Islamic tradition maybe call jinn, we would call spirits.
Right.
Like that whole like you good spirits, bad spirits. Here's a spirit of, your great grandmother who sort of watches over you. So I
Hmm.
think it's everything. It's the otherness they're talking about there in terms of the jinn.
Yeah, yeah,
Interestingly as well, and speaking of gin,
yeah,
where the words like obviously we call alcohol spirits,
yeah.
I think the reason for that is because the idea was that when you drink the spirits, it allowed these spirits to come into you, which would be what made you act different. You know what I mean? But you're just hammered, like, but that's why they're called spirits. Yeah, I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere a while ago.
Well, I mean, look, even if that isn't true, I like that explanation better than any other one that someone could
Yeah.
offer me. So I'm all about it. But this is the psychologist they're talking about shadow people in the next paragraph,
Yeah.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
she first heard about shadow people years ago when I was first when I was first writing a travel feature about haunted places in New Hope. Is that Philadelphia? Philadelphia. Is it?
Philadelphia. Yeah.
Yeah. I came across the story of a house in which the female resident claimed to have seen dark shadows shaped like humans. Not only that, they were aggressive. They sometimes knocked things over and slammed doors. So, yeah, so these ones are kind of mischievous, shall we say.
Mm, very
Um,
much so. Yeah.
yeah, I discovered that many shadow people experiencers are also ET experiencers, that being obviously extraterrestrials, and also abductees. So not just people that have experienced ET, but they've also been
Mm.
taken up into the sky. Through a long process, I concluded that shadow people are a shape-shifted form taken by jinn. Therefore, there is a profound connection between jinn and bad hauntings and ET abductions. Furthermore, the footprints of the jinn are evident throughout our mythologies about ancient aliens and gods, like that ancient alien meme fellow with the dude hair.
And the fella with the hair,
Yeah,
Guile.
yeah. The picture that emerged is of a major jinn development in all our entity contact experiences throughout history. The Jinn have a long standing, deeply embedded, and hidden presence among us, far greater than I anticipated in the early stages of my research. We see only the tip of the iceberg. Also, their interference in human affairs is extensive as well. We are influenced and manipulated, some more than others. So, this is all very interesting stuff, really. I
Mm.
mean, I think even right, let's take the psychologist out of it. Let's take all that blah, 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 all that
Hmm.
shit. Like, there is definitely, and it's a recurring theme in our podcast, a connection with a supernatural or like extraterrestrial type of thing. It's always existed in our folklore. Like, it's always existed as part of our tales that there is more than meets the eye. And I think that at the very
Yeah.
least, that's extremely fascinating. I mean, obviously, if you're a diehard atheist, you're not going to believe in any of that. But I think it's an interesting thing to explore. Like, what are your thoughts on aliens? Do you think that we've had contact? Do you think that there will
Um,
be? What's the crack?
yeah, I think There's there's a podcast called Strange Familiars, run by a guy called Timothy Renner, and he also has released several books. And one of
Right.
them I bought online a while ago. It is called "Don't Look Behind You," I think,
Okay.
on Toad Road. But basically, there's this place in Pennsylvania. They call it the Seven Gates of Hell or something like that. But it's basically this area that there's an awful lot of Bigfoot sightings and stuff like that. And what he found through the research, and he's a very kind of down to earth kind of a dude. He's not a crackpot, you know.
Yeah.
He's an open kind of interesting character. But what he found from his research and from talking to people who, and from he himself having experiences, is they would see lights very often in the forest. Again, these are like the will o' the wisp, which is what they kind of be known as in folklore. Not only lights, but he said in cases about people seeing UFOs, that would also happen in this area, along with Bigfoot encounters and other things as well. There's stuff about like flannel men, which is a strange thing. Just these guys that like look like they're just wearing like a flannel shirt, but they shouldn't be in that place. It's like something pretending to be normal, if that makes sense.
Say
Really
that.
weird stuff.
Alice in Chains tribute band.
Yeah.
Hanging out in the woods.
But basically hanging around the woods singing songs about being stuck in a box. So basically under that kind of view, and as well as this psychologist, what's her name there, Catherine Ramsland. So basically what she's saying is that the jinn is basically, let's call it, it's the other, because that's what Timothy Renner calls it. He calls all these things the other,
Right.
aliens, Bigfoot, all that stuff. He says it's the other part that bleeds in or rubs against our dimension from time to time, and maybe at certain points. So this is when I'm talking about forests and places like that. Maybe there are points where those other places are rubbing against our dimension and they can break through sometimes. And maybe that explains these shadow people just breaking into our dimension or sliding into our dimension for a bit and breaking out. But it's certainly interesting with this in that the jinn is everything that is otherworldly that comes into our reality, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent.
I like that.
I
It's
think
like,
that I would probably that, yeah.
yeah, I like that as a kind of a catch-all type of idea that, yeah, like anything that is not what you just see normally is like a gin type of thing. It's kind of interesting. And also, like, so I think we've said it before, like the way that me and Eamon do episodes is one of us takes the episode, writes the notes, comes up with the concept of the episode. And then, we send it on to each other. We have a look over it. If there's anything that we want to add, we add it. And one of the really cool things and really weird things was I was reading unrelated stuff and I came up with the Dark Watchers, which if you want to tell people about the Dark Watchers, it's a really weird coincidence and it sort of backs up what we're talking about like this kind of being a widespread idea.
Okay, yeah. So the Dark Watchers, also known by early Spanish settlers as Los Vigilantes Oscuros,
Very nice.
is a name given to a group of entities in California folklore, purportedly seen observing travelers along the Santa Lucia Mountains. The Dark Watchers are described as tall, sometimes giant-sized, featureless, dark silhouettes, often adorned with brimmed hats or walking sticks. They are most often reported to be seen in the hours around twilight and dawn. They are said to motionlessly watch travelers from the horizon along the Santa Lucia mountain range. According to legend, no one has seen one up close, and if someone were to approach them, they would disappear. The Dark Watchers are most famously given a brief mention in John Steinbeck's Flight, included in the 1938 collection of his short stories, The Long Valley. So, the quote is, Pepe looked suspiciously back every minute or so, and his eyes sought the tops of the ridges ahead. Once, on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail and minded his own business. So in contrast to our other shadowy friends, the Dark Watchers seem almost benevolent. But I suppose as long as you stay out of their way. But yeah, that's interesting. I had never heard of that before.
And the real interesting thing, the reason I put them in the notes was because of the brimless hat or like the brimmed hats. So I was like, That's
Yeah.
I thought that was a really strange coincidence that they popped up in something totally unrelated.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, is like, I guess, I don't know, is something like when you talk about the jinn and things bleeding into our reality, could they be trying to mimic us in certain ways? You know what I mean? Like you see aliens, they look bananas. Bigfoot looks like an old historical version of us. Aliens are potentially a future version of us, if that makes sense. Like you look at the Neanderthal, that's what we used to be, or something close to that. And aliens maybe is where we're going, and we're in the middle right now. You know, so do they try to kind of, maybe there's no timeline where they're from, and they try to mimic us of what we are, what we were, what we could be.
Yeah, maybe they're just not physical bodies and they have to basically like form a shadow to resemble us,
Mm.
like, and we can't
Yeah.
interact with that shadow, but that's kind of their
Well,
best
I
shot.
guess, yeah, I guess maybe think about like that story that I was saying to you that the lady told at that story slam thing, where they both saw a different depiction of this, let's call it an entity
Yeah.
or a thing, right? A feeling, an emotion, but they both saw it in different ways. So maybe it actually is just an energy, and it's almost like, you know, the way they say nothing exists outside nothing is created outside of your brain
Yeah.
creates the images it sees.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe there's some sort of way that these things can tap into that and show you a depiction. You know, I mean, you hear about it with sirens and all the rest of that stuff, trying to get lads to shipwreck themselves and things. Are these weird? Did that ever happen? Was it this sort of malicious or mischievous energy that took on a form like that? You know, and it actually isn't that at all. It can just take on these different, skinwalkers are the same. They take on different shapes.
Yeah, a
I
little
don't know.
bit
It's
again.
interesting.
Again, another shout out to the next episode. We do touch on skinwalkers a little bit in the
Mm,
werewolf episode, and we will do probably our own dedicated skinwalkers episode as well, I think.
yeah.
But
Oh, for sure, for
yeah,
sure.
you're
Yeah.
right about the brain thing. The interesting thing about these accounts, at least, implies that it's a collective, sort of a collective formation of things by your brain. Everyone is seeing this together, and everyone is reporting the same thing. So, in any case, whatever this is at least real in the confines of our own brains. And of course, like, but then again, you know, I was going to say maybe other animals don't see it. It's the only thing we see. But like, fucking, sometimes you watch a dog or a cat, and like, they'd freak the shit out of you more than you would yourself. You know, the way that they act sometimes, where they're
Yeah.
like stare at something and they're just like
Oh, oh
growling, and you're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
what the fuck is going on with you? Like, dogs can sometimes
Mm,
act really bizarre, and you're like, what the hell is going on? And cats the same. Cats are crazy in general, though, so it's like hard to. But
that's
yeah,
true.
yeah, dogs are sometimes out of the left field with how they act. But uh,
Mm,
is like this is I always thought this was more of an Irish thing, but this is a global thing. The old hag, right?
mm. Yeah, I think like it's a global thing, whereas we probably know it more prevalently as the old hag
Right,
in Irish culture. It probably
right.
has different maybe it's different depictions in different cultures, you know, but that again, the core of it is the same, you know?
So it's the old hag is one I've never experienced, but if you are in a group, if you're in a room with a group of friends, I guarantee you that if you ask, has anyone experienced the old hag, you will get at least one or two of your friends saying that they have. I know
Yeah.
personally, like two or three of my friends have had experienced the old hag. I've never had any sleep paralysis or anything like that. The only thing anywhere near that I get is that thing where you're falling, you know, when you're about to go into deeper REM, I think is what, or into REM sleep, I think is when that happens, when you're, and you sort of do that thing where you flop like a fish in the bed. Do you ever do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And you're like,
You
what
kind
the
of
fuck?
drop and bounce.
Yeah, yeah, it's like you're a fish and you just had to fucking landed on ground or something like that. It's a weird, crazy feeling.
Yeah,
But have
yeah.
you ever experienced the old hag yourself?
No, I never. I've been lucky that I've never had any sleep paralysis. I've
Three of
never
my
had a thing where
friends,
I woke up and couldn't move.
yeah, three of my friends have had the old hag.
Wow.
Yeah, and so to go into it a little bit in case like you don't know what we're talking about here, the night hag or old hag is the name given to a supernatural creature used to explain the phenomenon of sleep paralysis. It is a phenomenon which during which a person feels the presence of a supernatural malevolent being which immobilizes the person as if sitting on their chest or the foot of their bed. Yeah, one that I commonly hear is grabbing your ankles, kind of like it feels like your ankles are
Oh
bound
wow.
and you can't move, and
Yeah.
like you'll see this head at the end of the bed looking at you. There's a really nice painting here, The Nightmare. Well, I said nice, I mean it's terrifying, but it's The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli. Fuseli is thought to be one of the classic depictions of sleep paralysis, perceived as a demonic visitation. So back then they used to actually think of it as literally a demonic visitation in some cases. Could
Mm.
you imagine how terrifying, right? So like they didn't have the internet, they weren't able to like sort of all collaborate their thoughts and figure out things. Like so back then there was people who like literally believed like that was a demon and there was no other way to explain it. So they were like, yeah, I was visited by a demon. Like, can you imagine how terrifying that must have been?
Yeah, it's absolutely awful. Um, Especially this painting as well, just to see or just to explain what people are looking at. It's basically there's these crimson curtains that are draped in shadow and kind of separated at the middle. There's what looks like a donkey with weird sort of eyes and everything looking through it. Below that is a woman lying on a bed in a very awkward position,
Their
while
ditties are hanging out
a
now.
little demon. Yeah, the ditties are hanging out. And there's a demon sitting on her stomach, which would be this is what they called an incubus.
Ah.
Um, and again, the nightmare. So where it comes from, the nightmare. So a mare is a horse. So that's why you had that's peeking in there from the center, you know. Um,
Ah.
so yeah, it's a very strange kind of a very
Incubus.
strange pain, but very creepy.
Yeah, Incubus is the male succubus, right?
The
Is that?
male succubus. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And they're like a sexy demon, aren't they?
Yeah,
Sex
I thought
people.
so. You see, sex people demon. What it says here that sleep paralysis was widely considered the work of demons, and more specifically incubi, which were also thought to sit on the chests of the sleepers.
Right.
So this stuff doesn't really get into, you
Sex.
know, the sexy version. But I imagine like that's what I always thought succubus and incubus were like trying to have the ride with you.
Yeah, yeah, they want to get their ghost Mickey out. But I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting that researchers believe sleep paralysis is caused by a disturbed rapid eye movement cycle because it mostly happens as people are falling into or coming out of REM sleep. During that stage, their brains normally paralyze their muscles anyway, so they don't act out their dreams. So yeah, that like punching or punching
Yeah,
your
yeah.
sleep or whatever. Interestingly, there are people whose brains don't paralyze the body when in REM sleep. They will act out their dreams and could potentially injure themselves. Famous comedian Mike Birbiglia is an example of this and has to take sleeping tablets to avoid issues during sleep. Are the Hat Man and Shallow People modern day interpretation of the old hag and the incubi? I have that sometimes with sleep, man. I like that fucking. I'll try and ride and all in my sleep.
Yeah, you've told me that before.
Yeah, yeah, no, I'll
And
try
I've
and.
slept in rooms with you before. You make weird like orgasm,
Yeah, man, I'm
like
sexy
when you're asleep, you just kind of
24/7.
go, "Ah." Yeah, Rob Bill's 24, no time for sleep.
I'd
Gotta
like
get this mick out.
I would like to specify as well that that isn't a regular occurrence, the noises at least, because I record my sleep because I have sleep apnea, so I have to record
Mm.
it, which is actually spooky because then you can then hear
Say
yourself
so, yeah.
back as you're sleeping. But like I do talk in my sleep an awful lot. Like that's like big time. Um, but yeah, so like that shit does happen. Is fairly spooky, and like you said, you must have ran into your parents' room, sort of in a sleep haze.
Yeah, well, certainly in the when I thought a skeleton was chasing me. So yeah, it must have not. You know, it must have just whatever way I came awake. I was like half asleep, half awake, and the body was moving or whatever.
Oh.
So yeah, that's an interesting one. We have one here. It's of that old JK cinema. So at about
Hmm.
5 minutes into the video, you'll see this shadow person, which I would say is the most similar thing I've ever seen. To what I experienced that time when I was 18 and I kind of walked across my room. So can we put the links in the show notes or something, and people can
Yeah,
just click on it and
yeah.
see themselves?
I'm not exactly sure how that works, but in any case, the title is JK Cinema Urban Legend Series 3 Ghosts.
Hmm. Yeah.
I will try and put
Skip
the
ahead 5 minutes and you'll see it. Yeah, the
yeah.
car park ghost is the one most like what I saw.
Yeah, I will try to link that in the description, but I'm not sure how it works. You see, because we use a sort of a catch-all bio system. So, like, we put
Ah,
it in, and it goes to every site individually, and I don't know how it works. It might be fine, but I'll put it in any case. Um,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, shadow people are an interesting one. You know, I was never really a great believer of ghosts or spirits or apparitions, but after I seen something that I could not explain myself readily or easily, I sort of changed my outlook on it a little bit. Again, I'm not a huge believer in it or anything like that, but I do know that I seen something unusual.
Hmm.
So it's interesting. I think if anyone has any weird experiences like that and they would like to share them, do message us at monsterfuzzpodcast at gmail.com or on our Facebooks at monsterfuzzpodcast, and we can perhaps maybe read them out. I suppose in the future when it's just like more than my Matt and your Madison, we can like share, like we can do an episode, like one episode a month or something where we will talk about what people see, or maybe add it as a footnote, a bonus episode or something. But I think that'd be pretty cool, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be great. I'd love to get some God, if anyone has any just weird tales that happen to them, like I love it's probably one of my favorite things in the world is just people telling me their ghost stories.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if anybody has any weird ghost stories, I'd love to hear them. And I think for me as well, the takeaway for this episode, uh, and the thing that I found myself more drawn to or most drawn to is that idea of the gin and that it just encapsulates everything. Like I really like that idea, and it sort of
Yeah.
almost makes more sense than all the other stuff.
It's just a cool little word as well to use for like anything that's kind of
Mm.
not readily explainable. And yeah, much the same. And I was also going to mention this to you off air, but it seems that we're on air and we're talking about ghosts. We should definitely do a ghost episode. We should start planning one. Um, for well, I say next we'll be recording a few episodes, but for the next few episodes, we should definitely cover some ghost stories. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, we'll send if anybody who has any, if you could send them in, that'd be fantastic because I'd love to hear some.
Yeah, and we'd love to cover some of the more famous cases as well, and perhaps just because I'm ignorant to a lot of them, I would like to know about them. I haven't, admittedly, ghost stories and paranormal, supernatural, weirdo stuff is like my least known sort of genre of all this type of
Mm.
thing. So yeah, I'll definitely do some research, and I would like to get a few haunting episodes and things like that. I think those would be really interesting, and I think our audience would dig them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I must say I really enjoyed doing this episode. I thought it was a fun one, just going, because I like the spooky, ghosty stuff anyway. That's like my wheelhouse.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Yours is spooky,
it was a
ghosty.
really
I'm
fun one for me.
dinosaur-y, attacky.
Yeah.
That's the same. Mine is like Pleistocene shit and all that. But that was a great one. I really enjoy any episode like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. And yeah, like we said, at any time if you want to reach out with any story or anything interesting, or even episodes that you think we should do, yeah, don't forget to hit up monsterfuzzpodcast at gmail.com. And that's it from me. And
And it from me. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
peace.